Guys, is it okay if I move this down? Yeah. So we ended yesterday with a little bit of Future of the Web stuff, and we're going to do a little bit more of Future of the Web stuff today. And for me, it starts with these guys. 2 years ago, these gentlemen announced their retirement. Does everyone know who these guys are? Yeah, the Car Talk guys. They're Car Talk guys. They're legends. They're brothers, Tom and Ray Magliozzi, and until their last airing last October, they had hosted a show about cars on NPR for 35 years, since 1977. And this show, if you haven't heard it, was pretty simple. People called in, people like you and me, who had car trouble, and they'd explain their problem to Tom and Ray, and they'd joke about it until the caller got frustrated and hung up. No, actually, they had this uncanny ability to diagnose these problems based on their encyclopedic knowledge of cars, but also really weird vocalizations that people would do of their car sounds over the phone. So by 2012, these guys were not spring chickens at all. Tom was 75, Ray was 63, and their careers had followed this really windy path from engineering to teaching to auto mechanics to entertainment. So, you know, they'd worked really hard, and retirement was obviously warranted. So it was sad to say goodbye to hearing from them every Saturday morning, but it was not really a surprise. But what was a surprise is that no one's picking up where they left off. Right? Car Talk's going to continue in syndication. You're going to hear old episodes, but there's not going to be any new shows or new hosts. So why do you suppose that is? Well, maybe it's because no one wants to talk about cars anymore. I don't know. Maybe it's because no one wants to listen to people talk about cars. Maybe it's just because these guys are too hard an act to follow. I mean, all those things are really possible, but I don't think they're the reason. I started to notice something towards the end of the run. I listened to it regularly, even though I don't know a thing about cars. I just found it entertaining. And callers were always asking about their 82 Buick or their 87 Camry or their 77 Nova, even in 2012, even at the end. So I was always thinking, where are the hybrids? You know, why aren't people calling and asking about their Prius? I never heard that. It's not because these cars never had anything wrong with them. I think it's actually probably because they got screened out. See, it had been years since these guys ran a shop of their own, and while they knew cars like nobody else, they knew cars, right? Cars. I think if a Prius caller had gotten through the screener, these guys probably would have said something like, well, your first problem is you're driving a computer, not a car. You know, and then they'd laugh for 10 minutes. So I have a friend who's a mechanic. He's been one for a really long time. He works for a specialty shop that's licensed to service Fords. And we were talking recently, and he was just telling me how exponentially more difficult his job has become just in the last 5 years or so. It used to be that when a car came in, he and his team could diagnose the problem really quickly. They could get a quote back that was accurate, and they'd get the work done on time. But now, diagnosis takes more time. It takes more people. And the veterans who, like Tom and Ray, know the sound of a throttle control on the Fritz by heart, well, they have to fix throttle controls that fail because of a software problem, not because of a mechanical one. So everything in a car that used to be powered by good old-fashioned cogs and gears is now connected in some way to software. So engine control, power steering, anti-lock brakes, airbags, all of these things are controlled by processors that are actually designed by a really small number of third parties. And obviously the same thing is true for all the future-y stuff that we love in cars now. So driver assistance systems, GPS, audio systems, radar, all these things have to coordinate through a car's main CPU. And that CPU has to coordinate with hundreds of individual microcontrollers that are really distributed throughout the rest of the car, and each of which was designed independently. So it makes it terribly vulnerable to traditional computer problems like overflow on memory. And they eventually manifest as mechanical problems like your brakes failing as you're hurtling down the highway, which actually happened with Priuses. So our friends, our mechanic friends, have to deal with this now. And I found a pretty good quote that I think sums up this problem pretty well. These days, even a relatively straightforward task like throttle control is likely to use a sophisticated RTOS, which is a real-time operating system, and tens of thousands of lines of code. So I think it's not a giant leap to suggest that there's no Car Talk 2.0 today, because today's cars look more like computers than cars, and even the software engineers who create some of those microcontrollers don't know enough about the entire system to risk getting on the phone for an hour and answering strangers' questions. So technological change has introduced new levels of complexity to the world of the auto mechanic, to the point where many of them, I think justifiably, feel obsolete. They're given software to help them sift through the millions and millions of new SKUs that come out with each new car model, and then they're given software to help them troubleshoot a car's computers, but they have to relearn the software every few years when the technological paradigm shift and the old software doesn't mean anything for them anymore. So they see their skills being devalued or made irrelevant by new technology, and they struggle to find their way forward when their job looks a whole lot less like gear cranking and more like typing. So who can blame them, right? I mean, what's happening to mechanics is happening to us, right? We face more changes to what can be done and what should be done than I think any of us could reasonably keep straight. But should we feel obsolete? I don't think so, no. No, I mean, things become obsolete, tools become obsolete, ways of doing things become obsolete, but no, people don't become obsolete. When things become obsolete or ways of doing things become obsolete, people have to transition, we have to change. And so we are in transition. We always have been, really, and we probably always will be. After all, if you strip away all the jargon, right, we're just simply in the business of assisting communication. We've done it on the printed page, we're doing it on the screen. And the transition between the two is really just a series of many other accumulated transitions, and those continue. So I found myself saying that this thing that we're experiencing is really just a permanent transition. So we're going to have to get used to it. But I think that's a whole lot more hopeful than saying that a specific endpoint is obsolete and therefore feeling afraid. Because after all, really, obsolescence is really just opportunity looked at from the wrong angle. So what I want to show you this morning is what things and what ways of doing things are in transition right now and what opportunities that presents to you and me in it. So I'm going to move pretty quickly. Really, I just want to reframe our perspective on our place in the world as designers right now and get a few new things on our radar. So it's going to be less of a how-to and more of a how's it going. So it all starts with computer programming. Believe it or not, everything that we're experiencing right now on the web, the new things we can do, the new things we can use, is an outworking of the evolution of computer programming. So how many of you here have studied programming or are programmers or do a little bit of coding here and there? Okay, that's more hands than I anticipated. So it's possible that all of you guys, for the next few minutes, you might experience feelings of boredom or annoyance or outrage. It's totally normal. What I want to do is transition into the section of the talk where I'm going to try and sum up the history of programming in about 5 minutes. And I'm not a programmer, so I apologize in advance. The history of programming is really a story of abstraction. And studying that history feels almost like reverse engineering years and years of cryptography, right? Of peeling back layer after layer of coded symbols and language. And at the surface are the recognizable coding words like if and print. But deep down beneath, it's like these dense layers of ones and zeros. And for programmers, the abstraction principle is both the key to unlocking that coded history and a core value, right? It's never duplicate information if you don't have to. And over time, that principle has guided the evolution of programming from really countless rows of ones and zeros and binary expressions into more complicated routines that are actually, ironically, a breeze to express. So we've gone from low complexity at high volume to high complexity at really low volume, or in just basic human speak. We went from having to rewrite the rules of language, of speech, and customs every time we wanted to say hello to just being able to say hello, right? And while the abstraction might take today's programmer, like traditional programmer, further and further away from the guts of code, it just saves an incalculable amount of time, which is great if all you want to do in life is make a few boxes of text and images appear on the screen. Hello, that's what we do. So imagine peeling back these layers of language, right? That gives us a decent picture of timing, of how the complexity of programming has evolved over the years and accumulated. But today's development environments, I think, are better illustrated with another image. Nested dolls. So when you take a nested doll apart and you reach that last little stubby one, right, you realize that that endpoint only gives you one option, right, of putting them back together again. And so each doll is a bridge to the other one, and no individual doll is really fun enough to play with alone. And the same thing's true with programming. This guy's just going to do that forever. Each layer was created to make it possible to do more. And so none of today's programming layers is truly self-sufficient. In fact, they're quite literally programs running within other programs and languages, spoken within languages, spoken within languages. So take PHP, for example. PHP is the most common language used by web programmers today. It's the root of things you know, like WordPress or Drupal. And PHP was originally created in the C programming language simply as a set of scripts used to maintain a personal homepage. This guy's homepage. That's Rasmus Lerdorf, he's a real person. He's the inventor of PHP. And his first project is where the acronym PHP came from, Personal Homepage. And from there, it quickly expanded to become a robust language of its own, consisting of thousands of functions that programmers use to create websites. And PHP has only been in wide use since 1997, but since then it's been installed on hundreds of millions of servers and websites. Now, PHP is a language, but it's also a program you install. And PHP can't run independent of a system like Linux, and without C, which you can think of as the next programming doll down, there is no Linux. Which means that how you express something in PHP is really dependent upon how things are expressed in C, and really it's much more complicated than that. I see programmers looking at me badly. And like I said, I'm not a programmer, so I want to get out of this. This is uncomfortable for me. So we can move on. Actually, I feel fine. All of this makes pretty good sense when you think of websites as one-way communication tools, right? So you set up a server, you install an OS on it, you install PHP in that operating system, and then you get busy writing functions in PHP. And those functions serve up the content of the website to those who access it. And presto, you have GeoCities. That is a thing of beauty right there, in my opinion. If you don't agree, we just can't hang. The point is, we all know that websites today do far more than just run their own programs containing and displaying information, right? I mean, most websites today sit at the center of a much more complex ecosystem, and their job is to act as a platform on which the exchange of information between a variety of different parties can happen. So maybe they pull in information from a product inventory management system, and then they display it on their pages. And maybe they send information back about who's looking at those products to a CRM or a marketing automation suite, and then those offsite systems, well, they holler back and they say, hey, you know, someone's profile changed because they looked at an ad from that ad network we're a part of, or maybe they opened the email from that drip campaign. All that stuff is happening all the time, and the website is the broker, right? But to be good at that, to do that, a website has to play by the rules that these other databases set. So it's like diplomacy. There's different customs, there's different languages, there's different procedures, but it's one big complicated and interwoven ecosystem of information. And that's why we have application programming interfaces, or APIs. The API makes it possible to share content between a variety of platforms in different ways with ease. And in fact, most of the functionality that's become pretty standard and essential for today's websites is reliant upon APIs from various external platforms. And they describe their preferred formats for request and response messages. They describe the specific terminology for the objects in their databases, the information, and any other rules or restrictions of content. So whether it's as basic as embedding content, like a YouTube video or a Twitter stream, or something a little bit more sophisticated, like push and pull notifications or integrations with the CRM, or really complicated, like product inventory management reconciliation, it's all done with APIs. So thank goodness for APIs. But with these APIs in mind, the picture that this should be painting for you is of a discipline in process, right? Evolution of web development from a solitary creative act of programming to a cooperative logistical practice. It's become less and less about building content databases from the ground up and more about brokering the exchange of information from one system to another. So it's less writing and more translating. So wait, I mean, I build websites. You probably wouldn't be surprised to hear that we spend at least half our time and effort in a web development project figuring out how things will work, so planning, prototyping, that sort of thing. But we still often spend the equivalent amount of time on how things will look, still. And while HTML and CSS have gotten a bit more sophisticated over time, I'm still going to win friends and influence people by being a pedantic jerk and saying that HTML and CSS are not programming. They are markup, right? Even JavaScript, which is a bit further along on the spectrum towards programming, well, it's really rare today that a developer spends any time writing JavaScript from scratch, right? Instead, we borrow from libraries and we configure it a little bit. Most of the stuff that we imagine when we think of websites, all that whiz-bang stuff that we love, like responsive grids and transition animations and slideshows and expanding and contracting layers and div overlays and tabbed interfaces and fancy menus and sticky elements and even typography, is really becoming pretty plug and play at this point. Well, to be fair, it's plug, play, and debug, but the point is you find it, you copy and paste, you tweak. And I'm not trying to cheapen these skills at all, but to build a website today that consistently works within the broader ecosystem requires standardizing techniques and replicating them rather than reinventing them each time. But I think we need to watch this closely because commoditization is the price of standardization. That's generic Kleenex up there, folks. No Kleenex logo. You get it? So you see the web's ecosystem is growing in platform complexity, but it's stabilizing big time in terms of display methodology. And it has to. Think about it this way. If all the complicated back and forth API stuff is constantly in flux, which it is, mostly because we, the people of the web, are constantly moving from platform to platform depending on who gives us the funnest, shiniest free stuff to play with or where our friends are, then the outer layer, where we interact with surfaces and read things and find our way from place to place, that has to stabilize. Otherwise, all that effort to exchange information behind the scenes would be in vain because we'd be too confused to take any meaningful action ever. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that a radical shift in markup techniques is far less likely than the creation of a disruptive new platform that does something with existing information that's never been done before. So I made a note about the slide in my original outline. I thought I was going to have to Photoshop that. But it turns out the web had my back where everything upsetting that you can envision exists. This was like one of thousands of these types of images when I Googled it. So anyway, that was a probably bad idea. But the point is display methodology, old and busted, platform complexity, that's the new hotness, okay? So which means the value of front-end web development in the marketplace is dropping. While the value of the unseen stuff, the logistical, working behind the scenes, that stuff is rapidly increasing. That's the future of web development. And here's where it may not feel true, because most design and development shops have had to differentiate these roles of the front-end and back-end programmer due to how complicated both sides have become, front-end as well. But I assure you, the front-end side is stabilizing. And the very thing that a mechanic is afraid of today, that a programmer or a robot might, work her out of a job very soon, is the same fear that a front-end developer or designer would probably be pretty reasonable in having today. Now, I'm not trying to frighten anyone in this room, really. It's not going to happen overnight. But if you're thinking of your career in longer terms, so 5 years from now, 10 years from now, information logistics, coordinating the flow of information, not front-end visualization, is where you need to steer your position and your development capabilities, lest you be underbid very soon from now by somebody that can do it faster and cheaper than you, or rendered completely meaningless a little bit further off by some system that makes it just work at the click of a button. See, when your experience is in connecting platforms, the appearance of a new one is opportunity knocking, not slamming the door in your face. How's that for literal, right? Okay. Or as every consultant has ever said, in a meaningless way, you need to sell strategy, not tactics. You need to be building platforms, not programs. So with that, I need to move into the next section of the talk called Prove It, because I've made some pretty strong statements, and I imagine you're not just going to take my word for it. Does anyone recognize that still, by the way? One of my favorite childhood movies. That's the scene in The Sword and the Stone when everyone is angrily yelling, "Prove it," at this kid who yanked the sword out of the stone because they believed that it would be some big burly dude, and they'd been waiting decades for that to happen. But this happened instead. So there are two things I need to prove. The first thing is this idea that front-end work is becoming commoditized. Now, I think the logical argument I've already given you is pretty strong, but most people aren't convinced until they've seen something for themselves, so that's fair enough. And the second thing I need to prove is that there's enough of this information logistics business going on right now to warrant all of us focusing our attention on that rather than the next fancy JavaScript thing. So I'll start with front end. Who here remembers Dreamweaver? That's too many hands. If you don't, good for you. You dodged a bullet or avoided one of those cartoony banana peels you'd slip on and look like a fool. Dreamweaver was a piece of software that let you build a website without knowing any code. Okay, you just dragged boxes around, and you made pages look the way you want them to look, and then you kind of strung them together to make a website with multiple pages. It's sort of like what would have happened if Microsoft Word and PowerPoint had like a love child in the early 2000s. Now, I'm making it sound pretty lame, which it was, but I actually built a bunch of sites with Dreamweaver back in the day. And my question is this: why didn't Dreamweaver kill front-end web design? I mean, it did the coding for you, and you could peek behind the things you were drawing in the program, and you could kind of see the code that I was creating. And I actually learned a little bit of code that way. And of course, I didn't know at the time that the code I was learning was bad code, and every developer everywhere wanted to kill it with fire. And that's one reason it didn't catch on, by the way, the bad code thing. It made for sites that didn't work well in any browsers, and it made for site creators that just didn't know how to debug them. But the other reason was that Dreamweaver made it easy to create static websites just when no one wanted to create static websites anymore. And that was good news for programmers and developers, since there was no viable website magic website maker. They've kind of owned the last 15 years or so. And there's been a ton of work to go around. And things have only gotten more complex. So the general method that the database-driven website made us cobble together was, rather than building websites page by page, the Dreamweaver way, we've been building them template by template. And that was kind of great for a while. It even looked pretty sophisticated when content management was new enough to be a selling point. But along the way, this template by template approach has given us this contagion of template bloat. And you all heard from Karen McGrain the other day at this point, so you know why that's a sign of the apocalypse. So now we're exploring new ways of doing things, and one of them, the most interesting one, is modular content. The basic idea behind this is, rather than establishing a core set of content types and templates at the beginning of a project, which forces you or your colleagues or clients to think of everything you might possibly need someday and design that before you even have a chance to use anything, you build a system that lets you create content tools that are interwoven within a design system and are not template specific. And that gives you the freedom to invent new ways of presenting content in the future without having to go back to the drawing board and reconceive of this whole thing and then pay a developer to do it. Now here's a specific example of what I'm talking about. This is what modular content looks like in my firm's CMS. This is a particular client's page that's pretty uniquely designed. But instead of custom coding this thing, we've created a system that gives them full control over laying out the pages they see fit. So they can drag and drop content elements around. They can build on it as far as it like. It scales pretty well. They've got the freedom to make a page just like Dreamweaver promised, but the content database behind it that Dreamweaver never knew about. And we're not the only ones doing this, of course. This is pretty common. There are versions of it in WordPress and Drupal. There's Squarespace. There's this app called Blocks. All of them are kind of trying to get at this problem because the industry is aware that template stuff doesn't really work anymore. Now, the most important thing about this paradigm shift in content management is that it requires a paradigm shift in web design. Okay? It means less page crafting for designers and more systems thinking. So you've got to get out of this page-by-page Photoshop comping habit that I know most of us are doing all the time and get into the discipline of building systems that are documented in style guides, which in the short term means you're going to get a little bit more familiar with markup, but don't make a job of it. While that's happening, we've also finally seen someone truly make good on this Dreamweaver promise, because while modular content kind of gets at it, it's a method within a CMS, right, that's manifest in user tools. But, so it's a page builder, kind of. It's not a website builder. But here's this thing called Macaw. How many of you have used this? A few of you. Okay. Like Dreamweaver, it lets you create a website without having to know any code. But it does it more responsibly. So for one thing, it produces sound code. It's also responsive. But most importantly, it's a tool that's aware of the fact that the markup it produces needs to play nice in other systems. So Dreamweaver assumed it was a one-stop shop. I mean, you actually stuffed the content into the pages you were creating in the software. That's old school. We don't do that anymore. Macaw knows that you're building a site in WordPress or Drupal or whatever, and it's focused only on the framework. So you can actually use this thing. And we have agency partners now that are only doing early-stage concepting in Photoshop, but everything else they do in terms of production happens here already. They've already switched everything over. And this thing just came out. So all this stuff saves us designers a lot of time, which is a good thing, right? I mean, so maybe two of you are worried and thinking, well, what am I going to do with all this time? Well, I'll tell you, you crazy two of you, we're going to go on vacation for once, okay? What are we doing if we're not doing all that awful busy work we've been doing for the last 15 years? Well, first of all, we have better things to do with our time than tweak CSS. The real value that you have to offer in this marketplace is in conceiving of what you're going to make and how that might work and what value it represents. And yeah, sure, how it will look, but not in translating how things look into machine language. You can let that go. Let the machines do it. We should be steering our practice towards the complexity that's available to us now, and the only way we're going to do that is to let go of some of the busy work and spend the time that we were spending on that actually learning how things work. Okay, just to be clear, I'm not saying you need to become a developer. I'm saying you need to understand that ecosystem so that you can steer projects in a bigger picture direction, okay? And I mean all that logistical API stuff I was talking about earlier, and that's the second thing I need to prove. So to do that, let me start with something I know you're going to absolutely love. Salesforce. Okay, I invite you all to groan audibly. Go ahead, get it out of your system. Look, I was the kid who ate my lima beans first. I like to get the bad stuff out of the way. And it's okay. You guys are all still in the denial stage. One day you'll accept that you're really marketers. So no, Salesforce doesn't look like much fun, does it? And it's not. I'll promise you that. But believe me, Salesforce is at the center of just about everything that's going on right now, and we don't have a choice but to be friends with it. So for those of you who don't know, Salesforce is a customer relationship management tool, a CRM, and the basic thing it does is standardize and centralize information that is of interest to sales teams and marketing teams and support teams, okay? Now, in the old days, all that stuff would be siloed, and all kinds of annoying things happen from that. But now, marketers can send lead data that's gathered from their websites and from offsite stuff like social media or email campaigns, ad networks, retargeting. They can send all that stuff to Salesforce based on a standardized structure that makes information useful to other people, not just them. And that the leads that the marketing sends through there can even be scored, which is really, really helpful in terms of prioritizing salespeople's time. Now, because of the centralization and how customizable Salesforce is, it doesn't have to look like that. An entire marketplace has been built on it, much in the same way that an app marketplace has been built on iOS and Android. This is a billion-dollar industry already. So you get the gist. Let me just show you what this can make possible. So it's another view into my firm CMS. And by the way, these are not sales pitches. You can't buy this stuff. I'm just trying to show you what it looks like. Now you can see that I can hop in and quickly see what individual users are up to. And then I can dig deeper and view a more detailed profile for each person. Once they filled out a form, I can now see who they are and what pages they looked at, which I can watch in real time. And every action they've taken on the site. And we're also using a couple of other APIs to match their email address to social media so I can see where they're from and what interests they have and what they're doing on those networks. And at the bottom, I can also track this against what's happening in Salesforce. So as an opportunity becomes nurtured, I can see how the content of the site is affecting that process. So the question is, how do we get this? Okay, that's actually pretty straightforward. A user comes to our site. We don't know who they are, but we use a cookie to assign them a random number, and we track only their use of our site because we're not evil. Now, when they fill out a form, say asking for access to some content or requesting a meeting, we match that form data, their name, their email address, or whatever other fields were required, with their use profile. And now all that information is sent to Salesforce and registered as a new contact. Straightforward. That's web to lead. Now, based upon their specific behavior on our site, we score them. So perhaps they downloaded a webinar or two. That's plus 10 points each. And maybe they looked at our pricing page. That's plus 50 points. And maybe they requested a meeting with us, plus 100. You get the idea. All that tells sales that they're ready, right? So no pushiness is needed, which is great for the customer, and no waste of time, which is great for the sales team. Now, meanwhile, we've got this master profile in Salesforce. So when a user fills out another form, maybe they just want to access a white paper or something, we don't ask them for the same information again. So we already know their name and their email address. So this time, maybe we ask for their title or their company name, what industry they're in, or whether or not they are interested in partnering with a firm like mine. All of this stuff, with every call to action, we're just running through a master profile, right? And we're slowly learning more and more about our prospect, but never making them jump through the same hoop twice. So this is generally called progressive profiling. And of course, all this is voluntary. It's disclosed on the site. You can drop the cookie if you don't want to play. But all this is possible, more importantly, because of several APIs that exist to translate several languages that are spoken, each of which is talking about the same objects, right? The user, the lead, the actions, the content that's being accessed. So I don't know if that sounds very sophisticated to you, but it's actually a really common marketing example that's been going on for years. But if you put that same example in an e-commerce context, then you have a whole new level of complexity as inventory data is mixed in with audience data. You put that same example in publishing context, and you have a whole new level of complexity as behavioral tracking data is passed to ad networks, and then translated to demographically targeted profiles, and then passed to thousands of websites that all use that information to control what you see. Okay, this is all stuff you've used and seen very recently, I'm sure. Now, all of it is reliant upon APIs to figure out the logistics of moving the same piece of information, right? You, your actions, the content you're looking at, and all of its associated data from one place to another. That's the whole point. But for us, figuring out these logistics, that's going to be what we do now. Now, I flashed Amazon up there briefly. I think it would help to think about them a bit more broadly for a moment. What Salesforce is doing for sales and marketing, so centralization and standardization of information storage and transmission, Amazon is doing this for e-commerce. So how many of you here have built or worked on an e-commerce site recently? Okay, not that many. All right, so listen up. If you're committed to PayPal, Intuit, or Shopify, or even Magento, right? You need to know that each of those platforms, even at their various levels of reach and complexity, each of them will eventually be subsumed by Amazon, either by direct acquisition or by the inevitable customer attrition that happens when they just can't offer as good a deal as Amazon can. And right now, Amazon's got a mix of offerings, including installable storefront systems and payment processing modules. It's really kind of a bit of a mess right now, frankly, because few solutions do both things really, really well. In fact, the more sophisticated the e-commerce store, the less satisfactory and out-of-the-box storefront architecture is going to be. And the same thing's true of a processor. If you have a client that requires the sophistication of one of PayPal's top-tier services, then they're probably going to need a custom architecture, right? And an inventory system, and be willing to pay for that, rather than being shoehorned into some really amateur PayPal storefront. Now, there's plenty of nuance in between, but the world of e-commerce is really fractured in this way right now, and it's therefore offering a prime opportunity for the right platform to consolidate it. Even today, e-commerce just represents 1% of overall commerce in the world. And that's why so many are willing to pour cash into it right now. But I think Amazon is likely to win. For many, they already are the e-commerce platform. But there's plenty of indications that Amazon's really just getting started. The closest thing they have to a consolidated offering right now is this thing called Amazon Web Store, which is pretty compelling if you're willing to cleave, right, your online marketing and your sales. So you can build an entire web storefront with integrated processing. So for those of you who don't know, that means the validation of the credit card so that the money can go to the right place. And fulfillment using Amazon Web Store, which is cool, right? But it's not a CMS. So if you adopt it, it means limited content templates. It means limited integration with all those third parties I've been talking about. It means limited integration with your own marketing-focused website and its content. And a few other things that just look really bad from a UX perspective, like a completely different store URL or centralized, uncustomizable checkout screens. So it's not a silver bullet. But it's also not going to be the last thing they build. This is really just step one. It's a beta. Step two and beyond involve extensions in all the disparate pieces of e-commerce, so storefronts, payment processing, and fulfillment. In fact, this report from the Kernel, this came out last year, argued that Amazon is going to move into logistics. Well, duh. I mean, they know more about us than anyone. But this piece wasn't talking about information logistics. It was talking about moving stuff from place to place, right? From factory to the warehouse to your front door by way of the good old-fashioned stuff like shipping containers and trucks. So look out UPS, look out FedEx, look out DHL, even the post office. They're all vulnerable to this platform. But what about information logistics? Well, this piece goes on to mention that Amazon has an API for its retail fulfillment system. So how long until Amazon takes what it learns from its storefront system, Amazon Web Store, which we just looked at, and its fulfillment API, and joins them into a truly wall-to-wall e-commerce solution, right? So inventory management and storefront and payment processing and fulfillment. When they do, look out PayPal, look out Authorize.net. These are all processors, Chase Payment Tech, even Stripe, which people love right now. They're all vulnerable too. Well, what about beyond that? I could see them moving into product development very soon. After all, if you offer me a solid piece of software that connects to my 3D printer, I could consolidate my entire widget business. I make little toys like that. From development through fulfillment with Amazon, which would be pretty attractive. And here's why I think that. Right now, Amazon's got this program called Mechanical Turk. Have you heard of this? No? Mechanical Turk is a system that allows you to outsource what they call menial tasks to real live people for really lousy pay. It's like the Uber for office work, which is really depressing. Now, Amazon is being really forthright about this. They're calling it artificial intelligence. So aside from taking their cut of every transaction, the real value that Amazon derives from something like this is in R&D, in studying these simple tasks and building algorithms that can automate them. And that process, right, of first outsourcing commoditized services and then studying them at high volume and then reproducing them with software is reproducible itself with just about any technical service that drops to commodity level. So remember my earlier warnings about front-end web development? Well, you know, when artificial intelligence is just a scaled human army, what it can do is accelerate the systems and the processes that we'd otherwise wait to build until real artificial intelligence exists. But if there's one thing we know from Amazon's growth, nobody wants to wait for anything, right? And Amazon has the resources and the reach to meet our need for speed. So look out front-end web developers. Vulnerable. Amazon is saying that there's nothing we can't build and package and offer cheaper than you. Amazon wants to be the platform to end all platforms. This is really scary, right? Yikes. So again, I'm really not trying to scare you. I'm trying to clue you into what's going on. The good news is I think there is a silver lining here. I think while software is becoming more and more complex and introducing automation to where we thought we could be helpful and do something custom, use is still the big opportunity, right? Use, understanding it, planning for it, designing for it, that's still something we can offer. So keep in mind that every scenario I've shared with you so far all rely upon deep user experience work in a variety of different contexts. And this is why user experience is the field that it is now, not because some people call themselves UX when they don't know what that means. User experience is a way of expressing interactive design that transcends the deliverable, right? It focuses firmly on the abstractions, the exchanges of information, and the planning that connect the two. So yes, in the short term, we're hurtling towards this sort of post-comp era. Dan Mall said that recently. I don't know if you encountered that. But to me, it's beyond that, it's more of a post-form era. Our job as designers is to form with intent. I really like that definition. But it doesn't stop being our job when we can't see on the page or a screen what it is we're forming, right? That's a reality that's already been fully embraced. Sorry. If it wasn't, none of the stuff I've shown you so far would be true. It wouldn't exist. So if we're willing to embrace that too, right, to define ourselves as people who form with intent, then the future's open to us. We'll have jobs if we make the right decisions. So I don't know about you, but I could use a little bit more encouragement than that. All of this probably feels pretty daunting, right? I mean, some of you here are probably saying, look, I'm still trying to get my mind around this print-to-web transition, and this guy's up here talking about things I can't even see. And I get that. I have that barely keeping my head above water feeling all the time, even now. And so here's the good news about that, because there is good news. Kevin Kelly, bless you. Kevin Kelly, founder of Wired Magazine and author of What Technology Wants, he says, you are not late. Okay, he goes on to say, and I'm about to read you a really long quote, by the way, so I'm going to let you know when it's done. He goes on to say this: from our perspective now, the greatest online things of the first half of the century are all before us. All these miraculous inventions are waiting for that crazy, no one told me it was impossible visionary to start grabbing the low-hanging fruit, the equivalent of the .com names of 1994. Because here is something the graybeards in 2044 will tell you. Can you imagine how awesome it would have been to be an entrepreneur in 2014? Right? It's a wide open frontier. You could pick almost any category, X, and add some AI to it and throw it up on the cloud. Few devices had more than 1 or 2 sensors in them, unlike the hundreds now. Expectations and barriers were low. It was really easy to be the first. And then they'd sigh, if only we knew how possible everything was back then. So the truth right now, today, in 2014, is the best time to start something on the internet. There has never been a better time in the whole history of the world to invent something. There has never been a better time with more opportunities, more openings, lower barriers, higher benefit to risk ratios, better returns, greater upside than now, right now, this minute. This is the time that folks in the future will look back at and say, to have been alive and well back then. The last 30 years has created a marvelous starting point, a solid platform on which to build great things. However, the coolest stuff has not been invented yet. So what Kevin Kelly is saying is, we are just always stepping into this rushing river, right? That's what technology is, just dipping our toes in. And it's always shockingly, exhilaratingly cold to the first touch. It doesn't matter if you've been doing this since 1994 or you're just getting out of school now. That's the truth when technological change is the medium. This is a good thing. It means we don't just settle into our print-to-web transition and then develop expertise and stop. It means we're in a permanent transition. And here's something interesting about those .com names of 1994. Reading Kelly's quote reminded me of a story from back in 94, which is roughly when that picture of him was taken. He's an older man now. One of his colleagues at Wired back then had just discovered that McDonald's.com, the domain, was available. So he picked up the phone and he called a representative of McDonald's and he said, you need to buy this domain, like right now. And their media relations person said, well, I don't really understand what the internet is, and I've called some people and no one seems to really know what's going on. So the author bought the domain. So just so we're clear about this, in 1994, some Wired writer owned the domain for the biggest fast food joint on the planet. He owned it. And just in case you're thinking, well, come on, Chris, that was 1994. That was the Stone Age. Of course there was opportunity then. No one was on the internet yet. Well, I don't know, nobody? Let's question that for a second. Yahoo was there in 1994. That's when they started. This is what they looked like. And yeah, it was pretty darn basic, like sticks and stone tools basic, but they were just getting started. All they cared about at that point was being the web's librarian. So they didn't need much more than text and links. So they make sense on the internet of 1994, you're thinking. But McDonald's, well, no one was going to buy a burger online then, so what was the point? Well, here's a tiny investment firm's website in 1994. Have you ever heard of them? Have you ever heard of them outside of a Web Nerds talk about web history? No, I didn't think so. But there they were in 1994. Now, was anyone going to make an investment transaction online back then? No. But they were there anyway. See, the web of 94, after all, was not really a technological marvel, right? I mean, it had hypertext, maybe the occasional picture that loaded, just not at all. We had to wait over a decade, right, to get the good stuff, like video over the internet. We had to wait till, what, 2005 for YouTube to give us video over the internet, right? Well, actually, we did have video over the internet in 1994. Here's the world's oldest webcam showing you the fog of San Francisco since, you guessed it, 1994. And things really moved kind of quickly from there, actually. Just a year later, Amazon.com launched. Looked like this. Pretty Spartan, right? But look, you could buy books on the web. You could create an account. This is really sophisticated stuff for back then, all behind this really plain facade. And another year later, McDonald's actually got their domain back. And here's what they did with it. That beautiful thing right there. The low res of 96 really worked in their favor. What you can't see from there is those children who look like they're laughing, they're screaming. It's really quite sad. Now, fast forward another 10 years. That's true. Another 10 years more, and we got this. The Facebook. You saw Brian showed this on day one. The Facebook in 2004, which actually looks pretty Stone Age-ish to me, doesn't it? And it's not because this is now 10 years ago, right? It's because this is how beginnings look, right? And that's the whole point. You are not late, and you will never stop feeling late unless you stop assessing the situation by what you see right in front of you, right? This silly little survey of the last 20 years of the web shows that the things that matter, the real innovations that we're likely to recall, right, that suddenly you could publish and archive and search information through a computer, that we could buy things with the click of a mouse, that we could be entertained just as easily, that we could connect and communicate and build community virtually. All these things are experiences. They are and always have been more about what they do and what experience they facilitate than how they look. So we are not in the artifact business. We are in the experience business. And when you put it that way, you're suddenly liberated of this small notion that interactive design is about producing things to look at. No. It's about connecting things. It always has been. So we don't just build websites anymore. We're in a permanent transition. These sound like radical ideas, but they're not. Not really. Not if Kevin Kelly's right. Websites are really just the many tiny tips of this internet iceberg. And thinking of the internet in terms of websites is really about as silly as thinking of the sewer system in terms of manhole covers, right? We don't just build websites anymore because we're not interested in the manhole covers. We're interested in what's beneath them. And if you'll forgive me for pushing the metaphor into some naughty language, if you want to start working with the real shit, you're going to have to pry open those lids and dive in. So thank you all for listening. Thanks.